All right. So this is the hardest part, is these growth rates. Boy, they're really, really tough. Because I said, you don't have to just be accurate the next 2 or 3 years. You got to be accurate the next 50 to 100 years to get these things. It's really, really tough. So what we're going to think about in terms of growth rates, we're going to have a terminal or a long-term growth rate tied to our economic growth assumption. And then you're going to have a short-term growth rate. Right, so the terminal or long-term growth rate, there's a few ways you can do it. You could just do say, hey, I thought the economy was going to grow at 5%. You could just use that 5%. So my economic growth assumption was 5%. But then think about your industry. If the economy is going to grow at 5%, are you in an industry that's average, below average, above average growth versus the overall economy? It's kind of tough to think 40, 50, 60 years out. I'm going to say this is an industry under stress, so I will take some off of that growth. So I might use 3.5%. We'll see. This is a very competitive industry. It doesn't have a lot of new things to do. It's already fairly well saturated throughout the world. Its only growth rate, this is the way I think about it. Its only growth rate is going to be population growth plus inflation. Population growth is long-term expected to hit about 10 billion people and just stop. What happens when populations aren't growing anymore? If you're selling Kellogg's, how do you get growth? You've got to eat more cereal. Are people going to be eating a whole lot more cereal in 50 years than they are today? Probably. I don't know what else Kellogg sells. What else do they sell? I can't remember. I'm sure there's something else besides cereal, but mainly it's cereal, right? That's the main thing you think of. They have cereal bars and those kind of things. But I doubt suddenly in 25 years people start eating a whole bunch of cereal all of a sudden. So population growth is essentially going to hit zero in about 10, 15 years. And then all you're going to get is flat population growth plus zero, or 1-2% inflation maybe. So I'll use 3.5, but you could use the 5 if you wanted to. You can have at least a little discussion here to say why you're going to use economic growth for your industry. Is it an industry just average? Is it has some extra stuff in it that might give it some extra growth? Your long-term growth rate is not going to be 8, 9, 10%. It's just not going to happen. There's no, even Google, Amazon, no one's going to grow at 9, 10% over the long term. All right? So come up with numbers. I'm going to use 3.5%. And then you have short-term growth. And I gave you 3 approaches there. One, you can use the PEG ratio approach. The PEG ratio, you get their PEG ratio, and you get their PE ratio. So the PEG ratio, you can go to the statistics, and there's your PEG ratio, 7.51. And you get their forward PE ratio. The forward PE ratio is 13.39. And so what is their growth? Short term, PE ratio divided by PEG. If you want to, you can divide by 100 to get it into a percent. About 1.8%. Does that seem reasonable for Kellogg's? And we'll look at their history and we'll see if that's the case. That seems reasonable to me. So essentially what they're saying is if you take the PEG ratio, if you take the PE ratio No, I'll come back to it. We'll stick with that, we'll come back and look at it. All right, the second thing you can do is look at sustainable growth, which says short-term growth equals ROE times retention. I'm going to check our notes real quick. It's hard for me to think about this. PE divided by PEG is correct. I'm just worried that it's too low a number, but that's all right. Okay. All right, so what we need here, we need the ROE, we need the payout, because retention is 1 minus the payout. So ROE, internal equity through this firm is 50.21%. That's a high number, isn't it? Their payout ratio is right here, 57.44%. So what is their retention? 1 minus the payout. So what is their sustainable growth? You just take ROE times retention and you get 21%. That assumes that that ROE is their long-term stable ROE. I doubt they're going to make 50% every year, so I don't like that number. It's way, way too high, but that's the assumption. What else could you do? You could say maybe use the average of several years, because maybe this year was just really, really unusual. There's another problem we have with firms buying all their stock back, is making their equity really small. So they're getting these ridiculously high returns on equities because they don't have much equity. So I don't like this one. I'm going to throw out just too high. I don't believe that number. And what's the third thing you could do? Let's look at history. Right, so I pulled that before I got here. So here's Kellogg's history. So I went to Bloomberg. I don't have the formula in here, but I do have a YouTube that shows you how to do this. And I just got their earnings per share as far back as I could, back to 1990. And these are quarterly. So I counted down 12 quarters, which is 3 years, right? 12 quarters. You don't start with the first one because you have to have a beginning one to get your growth rate off of. So there's for 3 years ending 1993, they grew their earnings 10.68%. Then I did 5 years. 5 years would be 20 quarters. Then I did 10 years, which is 40 quarters. So there's all their historical growth. Their last 10 years growth rate was 2%. The last 5 years is 4.5%. Their last 3 years was 1.7%. This is not a heavy, fast-growing company. The graph is awfully messy. But you just look at the last few years, it's been really difficult for them to sustain significant growth. To me, the 10 years is kind of an interesting chart. And the 10 years, just look at the last several years. 2%, 2%, 2%. Suggest 2% is about, what we can expect. Now that's 2% the last 5 years when things weren't as bad as they are today. So 2% might be the high end. So yeah, just looking at that history, this has been a tough industry. You look at the 10-year, you see it's somewhat flat line, well below 5%. Here's 5%. They haven't gotten sustained 5-year 5% growth rates almost never, right? So, and the earnings per share I'm using are not the quarterly earnings per share. I'm using the trailing 12 months. So these are all annual numbers. All right, you gotta be careful that you don't use actually quarterly numbers, because then you get a lot of seasonality. So these are actually 12 quarters added together. And that's what I'm doing. So these are all annual growth rates. I just take the ending divided by beginning, raise it to the 1/3 minus 1. That gives you the 3-year growth rate. So overall, let me spell growth rate. So my final answer is I'm going to assume a 2% growth rate, because we're in a really, really bad spot right here. We got Amazon with Whole Foods doing stuff. You got, really the biggest thing is the moat issue, and I might talk about the moat issue here. Brand has a dying economic moat. That's probably the approach I would do. Brand used to be the strongest economic moat, really protected you, but because of the internet and everything going on, brand is not as powerful as it used to be. Your generation especially just doesn't care that it's Kellogg. You get a few people who says this brand C is just as good as Kellogg's, and you're like, that's good enough for me. Like some sports star says this is good or whatever. And it used to be you had to spend millions of dollars hiring people. Now you don't. You just have a YouTube video going viral, and you now got all the advertising for free. Yeah, you just asked Donald Trump about running for president. It doesn't cost so much money anymore. You just make sure you do outlandish things and people follow you. So brand doesn't have the protection it used to have. You can really create a brand almost overnight. It's pretty amazing. So Kellogg is struggling with that quite amazingly. All right. So the last part is the H, the time period from short-term to long-term growth. In this case, my short-term growth is lower than my long-term growth, so it's actually hurting me. So how long are we going to be in this period where we're waiting to see who wins and who loses? Kellogg's is a good brand, though. Everybody's heard of Kellogg's in here? There's no one who's never heard of Kellogg's. So they still have commercials. I don't have TV, so I don't know. They still have commercials Saturday morning during cartoons, maybe. A lot of cereal and all that kind of stuff. So it is a good brand name. They may survive. They might merge with General Mills or something like that. Who knows? But I think we're in a pretty tough period of times. So I think it's going to be a tough period until Amazon gets too big. So I'm going to say 8 years. Who knows? This is the hardest part. You just got to be creative writing here. I'm not doing a good job here because of time constraints. But how long is that going to take? I think it's going to be an extended period of time. I think 10's a long period of time, but it's going to be. I think Amazon still has a way to go. They're still going to be disrupting this industry. I think there's going to be a lot of up-and-comers coming in. Your generation is going to have to decide who the winners and losers are. There's going to be a lot of disruption, and then maybe it's going to settle down, and Kellogg's will find its place. So there we have it. Our long-term growth. We're just going to use 3.5%. Short-term growth. We can use 2. You notice on short-term growth, I completely ignored my second one. It just gave me such. There's no way I'm going to believe Kellogg's is going to grow at 20-something%. And then my H. What am I going to use for my H then? I think it's going to take 8 years to go from 2% to get back to that normal 3.5. My H will be what? Be 4, right? Is that half period? I don't know if we've done the H model in here yet or not, but we'll do it here real quick. All right, so there's most of the paper. The last part of the paper is the easy part. You just value the stock. So you have to use the dividend discount model. Capitalize earnings model and the H model. Dividend discount model, it's EPS 0 times 1 plus short-term growth divided by KE minus long-term growth. Capitalized earnings model, you must explain it because no one knows what that is. All right, so you got to explain it. You're using Professor Sweet's ideas, so go back to the notes and explain this. Don't just give it to me. You put capitalized earnings model into a paper and it'll be like, what in the world is that? I've never heard of that. All right, explain it. And then what is it? Oh, I'm sorry. This is dividend zero. Sorry, some of y'all were. All right, so what is this? It's earnings per share zero times 1 plus inflation divided by KE minus inflation. And essentially what I'm saying here is, let's take their current business, assume they pay out all their earnings as dividends and they can only grow with inflation. And the H model is the dividend discount model all over again with one added section. You're going to add dividend zero times H times growth short term minus growth long term. So there's your H model. So let's do each one of these. So let's get our dividend zero, our EPS zero. Now dividend zero is a little bit confusing because y'all in finance calls this a forward dividend, but I want you just to count this as dividend zero, all right? They say forward. I don't know why they do that. It's really bizarre. They've never done that before. I'm just going to say that $2.24 is dividend zero, what they paid the last 12 months. I haven't had time to check on that. I don't know why they changed that all of a sudden, but $2.24. Their earnings per share should be trailing 12 months, and it is $3.83. My inflation number, we can just get that from my discount rate, right? Remember we calculated our inflation back up here? So we already have that. So let's do each one of these models. So dividend zero times 1 plus my short-term growth divided by my KE. Where's my KE? 683. Minus my long-term growth rate. I get $79.25. We can do that formula again for the H model. So for the H model, it's the same thing. We're going to add in this middle section plus dividend zero times H times short-term growth minus long-term growth. There's my H. Now, how do we know if the H is correct? These two are exactly the same except for what? Dividend zero times H times short-term growth minus long-term growth divided by KE minus long-term growth. That should be the difference. And sure enough it is. So on the exam you can test that, right? The only difference in those two equations is dividend zero times H times short-term growth minus long-term growth divided by KE minus long-term growth. So you can double check and make sure you got the right answer. So there's my dividend discount model, there's my H model. All we got to do now is the earnings model. Sometimes on these firms you'll actually get a fairly strong number when you use the earnings model. Our inflation number is 2% divided by KE minus my 2%. There's my earnings model. So yeah, you shouldn't get a higher number, but often with these stocks you will get a higher number. Now what's the actual stock price? 56.81. Now what could you do? You could do like a graph. You know, you could graph those four. You could take the average of them. So I'm going to put a buy recommendation from Kellogg. Upside potential. I think it's worth 81 bucks. It's currently trading for 56. think this stock has 43% to go on the upside. What else could you do? Well, it might be interesting to even look at this stock the last 1 year. Its stock got up to 75 bucks. I think it's worth 81. 81 doesn't seem that unreasonable. If you go back 5 years, this is a stock that was at 82 bucks. So I'm essentially saying they're going to go back to where they were a couple of years ago. Maybe. Do I really believe that? No. But I mean, as fast as I put this together, I could probably come up with an answer that seems reasonable, right? We can rationalize what our numbers tell us to do. How wild could your answers be? Could you get 80 bucks for a stock that's trading for $700? That's certainly possible. Could you get 80 bucks for a stock trading for $4? It's certainly possible. What do most students do? They get 80 bucks on a $20 stock and they go back and change their assumptions so they get something closer to 20 bucks, which means they don't believe in any of this stuff at all. So I would say do this entire thing and don't look at the stock price. That's exactly what I did. I had no idea where Kellogg's was trading. And now I'm looking at it and saying, yeah, based on these assumptions, I'm not using really aggressive assumptions, right? My discount rate looks about right. My growth rates are 2% and 3.5%. That's not particularly excessive. And I got a stock that looks like it's cheap. Well, you expect consumer staples to be cheap because the whole industry's been beaten down. So yeah, maybe this is the time you're buying these stocks because they're really beaten down, or they have more pain and suffering to go. Some of y'all might argue, man, this industry is under so much pressure, my short-term growth is going to be negative 20%. I don't know why that's a negative number. That shouldn't have been a negative number. So where did that? Wow, I have to fix. Wow, there's something wrong with. All right, I don't know what I did, so I'll go back and check that and see why I have a. Oh, it's. Do I have a? Yeah, that shouldn't have happened. So anyway, all right, now that bothers me. There's something wrong with the spreadsheet. I'll fix it before I put it out there on Blackboard. All right, so your very last thing you do is you compare it to the current price. I've had some students turn in papers where they don't tell me what the current price is. They say, I think Kellogg's is worth $81, so I'm putting a buy recommendation. I'm like, well, what's it currently cost? Right? It's pretty useless without the current price, right? So tell me what the current price is. So some students leave that out, so make sure you do that. All right.